So here's the full screen, high definition conceptual screenshot that I put together last video. Now this is the high def version where I went through and made everything look nice and sharp and detailed, made sure the font had more distinctiveness to it and everything. And I actually did have footage captured for how I did all of this, but unfortunately it kind of wasn't recorded at the right resolution, so it looks really bad. So instead I'm just going to make up for it by just giving you guys some examples of the tricks I did to make this look like this. Now, dealing with diagonals is probably the most infuriating when you're going from a low resolution to a high resolution. My solution has always been twofold. The first is to just sort of eyeball it, because you're never going to get it perfect going from low res to high res with diagonal lines. In fact, even going from one high res to another high res, it's still not going to be perfect. So just make it look the way you want it to. And then the second trick, after you've eyeballed it and made all of your adjustments and everything, is to add sort of an anti-aliasing effect, as it were. Now, the way to do this is to just sort of know, like, well, if you got 1 pixel difference in your diagonal, if you're at a 45-degree angle, it's only going to be 1 pixel over and 1 pixel up, and, well, then you only need to do, like, 1 step between the 2 different shades, so 50-50. So what you do is you take your black, and you make it a 50% opaque, and you just apply it. And you just apply it to all the edge, and there you go. You've softened up the diagonal line there so that it doesn't look as sharp to the viewer's eye. Now, if you're doing this with a line that is 2 over and 1 up, then you know that there's 2 steps between. So you need to have a 33% opaque part and a 67% opaque part. And this is sort of a slow way of going about doing this. Another trick you can do is to just use the internal tools for whatever software you're using. Now, I'm using an old copy of PaintShop Pro 7. Again, it's old software, but I use it because it works. And in this case, what you want to do is just simply make your line or whatever and make it at the angle you want it at. And then you just sort of steal the part of the line that has all the anti-aliasing and everything, and you just copy that around. And that gives you the sort of effect that you want. In dealing with the diagonals, you'll also notice that the font is not exactly as you would expect. One of the things that happens when you're dealing with diagonals specifically is that if you're using a sort of squared type line to go horizontal or vertical, but then you suddenly try to make it diagonal, it's going to be a lot visually thicker than it should be. Like, I mean, it makes sense mathematically, it just doesn't look right. So one of the trade-offs you have to consider when you're dealing with fonts in particular is, how do you want to handle that? Do you want your lines to be thicker, or do you want to make some sort of concession for style? In this case, what I did was I tried to make the diagonal lines look about the same width as the horizontal and vertical lines, and I just sort of took into account that either the line was going to cut off certain aspects of the sort of solid parts of it, like with the N, or in the case of like the W's and the M's, have it so that it sort of tapers off to not a square edge, but sort of a rectangular edge in a sense. If you look at it, you can sort of see what I'm talking about. You'll also notice I sort of added the sort of scoring parts to the, well, not scoring parts, sort of the separations in the font to make it look more stylized in a sense. You'll note that it's pretty much the same font that I used for the GMG logo for the start of the season. You're going to notice going forwards, if I manage to keep doing these for more than one season, that every single time there's a new season, it's actually going to change the look of the GMG logo to match how it's going to sort of be the style and aesthetics for whatever game I'm working on. So just something to watch out for in the future. I also added a lot more detail to the enemy sprites and to the player sprite. I don't know if they're going to hold like this. Like, this is just done like on the fly, right? So as I'm going forwards and coming up with the finalized designs, I might use some of these, I might not. I might alter them a bit more. It really depends on what works out and what doesn't. One other thing to keep in mind with the player sprite in particular is that the players will actually be able to choose 3 different colors for their ship. The main color, the secondary color, and the highlight color. And the way this is going to work is that every player's ship is actually going to be made up of 3 sprites, all drawn simultaneously, just with different colors on the vertex buffer. Or not the vertex, different colors on their vertices, so that when it's drawn to screen, the graphics card knows to tint them appropriately. And that's basically how I ended up with this image, is I just go through everything, make everything a little more sharper, just sort of cut off parts and add parts. It's really not as hard as it looks to do this sort of thing. If you have a low resolution picture already, all you really got to do is just sort of eyeball it. Just start shaving away at pixels and adding pixels in, and before you know it, it'll actually look pretty decent. Like, I mean, that's the whole thing, is just change stuff around until it looks decent. That's really all you got to do. Now, I know it's easier said than done because, you know, some people out there are going to have no artistic talent. Some people out there are going to have tons of artistic talent. And this is obviously just one method. Like, I mean, if you're doing a game with much more realistic graphics, this kind of method might not work out for you. And in future seasons of the show, we may see that kind of thing going on. But for this style of graphics, we're doing pretty much pixel art. And when you're doing pixel art, you basically want to do it until it looks good. And that's what it comes down to.